In this article breakdown video, I'm going to be covering Marshall Sutcliffe's Avatar: The Last Airbender draft overview article that he wrote to help players understand the format before the World Championships. This was a great read where he covers a lot of different valuable insights that he has on the format, so I wanted to share it with all of you so that you could benefit from its wise advice, and also I'm going to be sprinkling in my own thoughts as well as I go through it, so you can get multiple different perspectives. If you've never heard of Marshall, he is a host of the Limited Resources podcast. He's a commentator for Giant Magic events. He's a great player and an even better teacher, so it's great to hear his perspective. We're going to skip this intro section because it's just talking about the World Championships mostly, and we want to get into the meat of the article, which is where he talks about his thoughts on the format. Okie doke. The good news is that they, the players at the World Championships, will be greeted by a very solid format in Magic the Gathering Avatar: The Last Airbender draft. I was given a homework assignment by Luis Scott Vargas to watch the series, and I'm almost all the way through. This means that I now know what the four big powers are in that world: airbending, waterbending, earthbending, and firebending. The team who designed this set put a lot of care into the design of individual cards, but what really stands out is how well the four mechanics all work. They are interesting, balanced, and evocative. The set is a true home run. I couldn't agree more. I think they did a fantastic job designing the mechanics in this set, and I've been having a ton of fun with it as well. For the World Championship players, this is mostly good news. If we widen our view from individual mechanics to color pairs and draft archetypes, things are pretty even. There isn't a color badly lagging behind or pulling ahead from the rest, and almost all of the color pairs, splashing included, are viable. You guessed right if you pinpointed Simic as the one deck without great results so far, though it's almost always joined by a red splash, which helps. When you do that, it's pretty decent. So he's saying that the format is very balanced. I would generally agree. And Simic, for those of you that don't know the lingo, is blue-green. So blue-green is a little bit weaker in this format because it's kind of a late game deck, but doesn't necessarily always overcome the power level of other late game decks because there's a lot of powerful late game rares and things like that. And Simic doesn't always have the removal spells to deal with them adequately. But it often does splash red because the lessons synergy found in blue-green pairs really well with the lessons in red and also some of the lessons synergy found in things like blue-red. And so once you play those three colors together, which I do think often happens, the deck kind of becomes a little bit better than if you're just playing pure blue-green, which does mean if you are playing that strategy, it's often worth trying to splash. So taking cards that'll help fix your mana in preparation for a splash, whereas a lot of the times with other color combinations, like if you're, say, playing like a black-red deck, you're not necessarily looking to splash unless you open a really powerful blue card or something like that. Whereas with blue-green, you can kind of be preparing to try and splash red in advance. I would also say that black-red has been a bit of a lower power level archetype. It can still get the job done, especially if you have some rares or mythics, but from a personal perspective, I don't think black-red has been quite as strong as some of the other color combinations. Black in general, some of the color pairs that it goes with lag a little bit behind. Black-green maybe isn't the best either. But as he was saying, it's relatively balanced, and I personally have had success with pretty much every single deck in the format, and I think that that has been echoed by his experience as well. You can do well with any deck as long as it's open. There's not a color. Sometimes there's colors that like you basically don't want to ever draft, and that's not the case in this format. Even the weaker decks like blue-green, I've had good results with sometimes if you get the right combinations of cards. And so he's just basically saying it's a balanced format, which has been my experience as well. The reason this is mostly good news is that it's a bit of a double-edged sword to have a format that is relatively even as far as the archetypes go. On one hand, it means that if you put in the time and effort, you can stay open in the draft and let your seat dictate what archetype to go for. And with few exceptions, you'll be able to craft a competitive deck from that position. On the other hand, if you're concentrating on constructed and don't have the bandwidth to play as many drafts as you'd like, it means you can't just latch onto one or two archetypes and hope they come in. Not if you want a real chance at playing on Sunday anyway. And playing on Sunday is when you're playing in the top 8, which means you've done really well in the format. And I would say for players that aren't playing at the World Championship, this is just all good news because we're not trying to only draft like one or two decks. We want to be able to play all of the archetypes. We want to have a really varied experience when we play the format. And so this is just only kind of bad news for people playing at the World Championships that aren't going to have maybe as much time to test for both constructed and limited because the set does come out relatively close to when the World Championships happen. So they aren't going to be able to maybe play as many drafts as they'd want while also settling in on a constructed deck because the World Championships each day has 3 rounds of draft, 4 rounds of constructed. And then the top 8 is constructed. So you really want to make sure you have a good constructed deck. And so that's why he says that. But for us, I don't think it's a double-edged sword at all. For the average player, having a really balanced format is usually a fantastic sign, as long as the format's fun, which this one is because the mechanics are great and it's really flavorful. So great stuff for us. He says, blue is best, obviously. Color-wise, blue has led the pack so far. Blessed with some really nice interactive spells, plus some good old-fashioned value cards, blue is the deepest color and will be a common place for our drafters to start. Now, I will say that I think white is a little bit better than blue. I think that it has a little bit better color combinations. And I think that blue is also good. Like, I have blue in second place, but I think that the white cards in general like pair really well with archetypes. So like blue, white, white, red, and white, green. I think not that order. Blue, white, green, and then red, white are three of my like the best archetypes, I think. And I think the fact that they all include white means that I think white might be a little bit better of a place to start, but blue does also have some really good decks as well. And it's impossible to deny that blue has some fantastic commons and some really like good depth at all rarities and just good value. So blue is a key part of a lot of decks, though I would say that I think the white ally decks and the white just like beatdown decks are a little bit better. But his opinion is that blue is best, and that's why it's nice to see multiple different perspectives, and that's also why I wanted to share some of my perspectives as well. While it is not normally known for its great removal, blue gets the goods here, with Lost Days being a legit 2-for-1 removal spell. It's extra good against tokens and earthbent lands, and it randomly hits enchantments. It's also a lesson spell. Lost Days is this one. It's 4 and a blue. For an instant, the owner of target creature or enchantment puts it into their library second from the top or bottom, and you create a clue token. When he says it's a 2-for-1, he means that you're going to get a card back out of Lost Days. So if you cast Lost Days on your opponent's creature, you remove that creature. Then once you sacrifice the clue, you draw a card. So you used your Lost Days to remove one of your opponent's cards, trading one card for one card. And then when you sacrifice the clue token, you drew another card. So that's what a 2-for-1 is. It's when you get to get 2 cards out of just playing 1 card. So a typical 2-for-1 might be, I play a card that draws me 2 cards because I played 1 card, got 2 cards. Lost Days is a little bit better because it interacts with your opponent while getting an extra little bit of value. And so Lost Days, being a lesson, is also relevant, being an instant speed is lesson. And when he says it's good against earthbent lands, the earthbent lands will come back into play if they die or get put into exile, but because Lost Days puts them into the deck, they get removed for good. So that's what he means by that. And also Watery Grasp being a good removal spell is another example of blue getting good interaction for creatures that are already in play, which they don't, the color doesn't always get. And then Forecasting Fortune Teller and It'll Quench You are other cards he's like highlighting here because they're both pretty good. It'll Quench You is perfect for the early to mid game and is a lesson to boot. Watery Grasp is like the 6th card we have dubbed the blue Swords to Plowshares on limited resources. Swords to Plowshares is like a 1-mana removal spell for anything. It's the best removal spell of all time. And the blue Swords to Plowshares is usually what they say for like a 1-mana blue card that does like kind of kills a creature. It's not that, but it's way better than it looks at first glance. Forecasting Fortune Teller ticks a lot of boxes by being a 2-mana creature, creating a clue, being a good blocker, an effective target to airbend, and an ally. So that's the Forecasting Fortune Teller. Definitely a great blue card, blue common. If you want to start at the top, white-blue has been my favorite in the early running. You get all these great blue commons, but you also get to mix them with a suite of efficient, powerful, and even synergistic commons from white. Blue-white has also been a deck that I have seen as being very, very strong and probably the best deck in the format. White's removal and interaction is super solid, with Path to Redemption being top tier common removal. Path to Redemption enchants a creature it can't attack or block, and then you can sacrifice it for 5 mana to exile enchanted creature and create a 1/1. And Path to Redemption costs 1 and a white. Now, Path to Redemption does have a little bit of a weakness if your opponent is airbending their own cards, because you put Path to Redemption on their creature, they airbend it, and then the Path to Redemption falls off. But it's still a really nice card because it only costs 2 mana. So even if it's not always permanent, it can be a very valuable card. Then Airbending Lesson is, he says, Airbending Lesson is flexible for getting a blocker out of the way or saving your own creature and generating some value. Airbending Lesson is one of my favorite white commons as well. Definitely really strong. Just interaction that draws you a card is just very, very potent, at instant speed especially. Yip Yip might be my favorite card in the set after watching the show. Charm aside, it's a fantastic combat trick, and my guess is that we'll see at least one game in the World Championship come down to a Yip Yip being cast at the perfect time. So Yip Yip can give a creature +2/+2. If an ally, it also gains flying. I haven't seen Yip Yip do a ton of stuff. I think generally combat tricks aren't a huge priority a lot of the time because they're relatively interchangeable, but 1-mana combat tricks definitely tend to do much better than 2-mana combat tricks, and even especially better than 3-mana, just because you want to keep your combat tricks cheap because they are somewhat inflexible. You want to basically only use them when attacking, things like that, but Yip Yip is definitely a solid option. The white common spells are good, but the creatures might even be better. He just highlights pretty much all of the white common creatures: Compassionate Healer, Kyoshi Warriors, Glider Kids, Water Tribe Captain, Zhang's Deserters, Avatar Enthusiasts. This is a solid group of creatures if there ever were one, but you have to look a little closer to see what they all have in common. They are all allies. Allies are all over the place. There are over 75 of them in the set, and they are powerful and synergistic, especially once you get into the higher rarities where there are some nasty payoffs for the allies deck. Notably, white-blue has a cares about flying theme, but this deck plays out as an allies deck with some flyers thrown in for good measure. It's not something you need to focus on when drafting the deck. That's great insight to have. It's the sort of thing where when you read through the card list, you look at the uncommons that are blue-white, you see this stuff about flyers and cards that buff flyers and stuff of that nature. You're like, okay, blue-white is a flyers deck, but actually playing the set and realizing that it's an allies deck with a flying sub-theme is really valuable insight, and it's great that Marshall's sharing that here. If I were to give a player a crash course in this set, it would start with white-blue. But being realistic, if you're competing at the World Championship and are in the market for a crash course in draft, you've made some grave scheduling errors leading up to the tournament, which means we must go deeper. To build around or not to build around. One of the big milestones you want to get to if you are competing in an event like the World Championship is the ability to figure out which build around cards are worth going for and which aren't. Build-around cards are different than normal cards in that they tend to have a higher power ceiling if you can successfully support them. This often means taking cards during the draft that you might not normally take with the idea of supporting your build-around cards instead. The result is a risk, but it also offers plenty of rewards. If you go all in on a certain card and can't find the support pieces, it can be disastrous. But if it does come together, it can end up being the most powerful thing you can do in a given format. The first, and just for those who've never heard of a build-around card is a card that you need to put a little bit of extra work into. So a very classic example would be a card that rewards you for casting a bunch of instants and sorceries. So it might cost like one less for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard or something like that. And so you build around it by putting more instants and sorceries into your deck than you might otherwise do because you have this card that, if supported, will be a lot better. The first step for build-arounds is easy mode, 3-color cards. You have to dedicate some amount of your deck to mana fixing to cast these, but that often isn't that difficult and the payoff can be big. So he highlights 4 cards here: Aang at the Crossroads, Katara the Fearless, Iroh Grand Lotus, and Sokka Tenacious Tactician. Of these 4, I would say that Aang at the Crossroads is like the best one. It's 5 mana. It can kind of take over the game, especially because it's like a 5 mana 3/3 flyer. When you look at the top 5 cards of your library, you can put a creature card with mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield. So a lot of the times you're going to be able to hit a creature and just get like a 5 mana 3/3 flyer, but also something else. And then when another creature you control leaves, you transform Aang, and then it's just like a giant 4/4 flyer that gives your land vigilance and earthbends every turn. So that's a really, really strong one. I also think Iroh is fantastic as a 6 mana 5/5 with blue, red, and green, and then it's got firebending too. It lets you cast your spells from your graveyard and cast your lessons for 1 during your turn. So it's those 2 are my ones that I think are the best of these 4 that he's highlighting, and especially because they include green, so you're going to get a little bit of extra mana fixing. So if you are drafting, I think those 2 are the best ones of these 4. Katara the Fearless can do some work. It does require a little bit more support. You have to have kind of a dedicated allies deck, which luckily blue, white, and green are trying to do. But because it's a 3 mana spell, you're not always going to be able to cast it on turn 3 because you might not have your mana fixing yet. Whereas these other ones, you have a few more turns to find your mana fixing, get those under you, and they're a little bit better in the late game. Because Katara is a little bit better when you play her early and then get to get all of your allies triggering twice with their enters and effects or things like that. And so playing her like as a top deck isn't necessarily as good, whereas top decking something like Iroh, top decking something like Aang is like absolutely fantastic. Sokka is good, but the fact that he doesn't include green as a 3-color rare makes him a little bit harder to use as well, because you don't have as much fixing when you don't have access to green mana in your deck. But he's also very strong and definitely a card you can build around, and that's why he's talking about them being build around cards, because if you get them early, they can be worth building around. Each of these 3-color cards can be the best color cards in your deck and are worth the splash. We will see players stretch their mana base for cards of this quality, as the payoff is definitely worth it, and the setup cost isn't too high. The ones where green is part of the mix are even easier to splash, since green gets some really nice mana fixing in this set. The second stop is a bit more out there, but still somewhat in range if it seems like it might be worth it. Whether it's trying to get that 4th color for Avatar Aang, so Avatar Aang is like a 4-color card that includes every color but black, going over the top with Phoenix Fleet Airship, a great build around because you don't have to build around it at all, it just gets a lot better if you do, so Phoenix Fleet Airship rewards you for having some sacrifice synergies. Finding the right board state for a Fated Firepower. This is a really strong card if you can get a wide board state, because it makes all of your sources deal extra damage. Or even a wild Sozin's Comet. I've never seen anybody use Sozin's Comet. This is a mythic rare, but don't get... this card's really hard to use in draft. If you do pull it off, it's definitely very cool, but there's not a lot of like X spells or things like that you can really sink into a Sozin's Comet turn. But there's definitely some activated abilities and things like that you could use the mana for. So it's not like a wildly unplayable card in every scenario, but it's just not a card you're going to be seeing very frequently. Like, of the times it gets drafted, I would expect it makes the deck like 5% of the time or something like that, or maybe even less. But it's really sweet, and it's definitely a build around card, because you can't just play this card without having a plan in mind. Or even or just nudging bitter work over the line. This is just the red-green payoff. I think in red-green decks, it usually gets enough cards to make it work, but it's not like a card I take super early and try to play red-green. It's more of the sort of build around that's like, okay, red-green decks can add some extra 4-powered creatures to make it work, but it's not like a card that I'm really trying to go over the top with. Like, I'm not trying to take this build around early and draft around it like I am with some of the other ones. He also highlights Avatar Destiny here, which I don't think is a great card. It's just too easy to disrupt this one with the fact that the creature has to die for you to get the Avatar Destiny back, and there's like exile or there's enchantment based removal, like the what's it called, the one that we saw earlier, the Path to Redemption, the Watery Grass. Both of those cards just kind of dunk on Avatar Destiny, and so overall I don't really recommend trying to play this card. But again, it's kind of a build around in some ways, because if you fill your graveyard, maybe you can do something with it. Or just nudging bitter work over the line. It gets you most of the way there on its own. There are some serious judgment calls to be made about when and if it's the right time to go for build-arounds in this category. Finally, there is I was built for this category of build-arounds, the shrines. Shrines care about having other shrines around. The more of them you have, the better they get. There's one for each color, and they are all uncommon cards. So these are the 5 shrines. Unfortunately, shrines don't seem to be a thing in Magic the Gathering Avatar The Last Airbender Limited. They just aren't supported well enough, and none of them are playable as standalone cards. I highly doubt we will see anyone go for this strategy at the draft tables, though I would love it if they did. I've had that same experience. I haven't seen a shrines deck come together. I know some players have. I've been told that in comment section whenever I mention this, but I haven't seen it come together. It doesn't seem like the sort of deck that really comes together that often, even if it does come together, and it's a high risk reward, like high risk strategy for not a high reward. Because if you're taking the shrine and then they just don't get opened, or there's some other player that randomly speculates on a shrine or things like that, then you just waste a draft pick on a shrine. Though it's like, if you get them like last pick, it's not that much of a waste if you do take one. But yeah, the hidden build around deck, I wouldn't recommend going for shrines if you're trying to win in this format. It's basically what he's saying as well. And he's saying that the World Championship competitors probably won't either. The hidden build around deck, monocolor. It's kind of funny, but there is one more cycle of build around payoffs. They are rewards for going monocolor or close to it. These have actually proven really interesting, because you can sometimes manage to slip them into a mana base with like 10 or 11 copies of a basic land type. So like 10 plains, 7 islands, or something like that. But if you go all in with all of your lands being that type, usually monocolor decks can get away with 16 lands. The monocolor decks actually perform quite well, especially green and white. I would say white is far more common as a monocolor deck, because the white as a color is far more deep and kind of covers all of its bases a little bit better, because its removal is a little bit better than green's removal. But the monocolored payoffs are Gather the White Lotus, which makes a bunch of 1/1s, Waterbending Scroll, which can draw you extra cards and is cheaper if you have a lot of islands, Catgator, which is a great top-end card, and then Solstice Revelations, which I have not really seen anyone play, but if you're mono red, is kind of reasonable, and then Rock-a-Lanch, which is just going to make a bunch of Earthbending. I've seen that one get played. I've seen pretty much all these get played except Solstice Revelations. I think I've seen this get played like once or twice, and it was really bad because they weren't playing mono red, and mono red is a little bit harder to come together. But I think I've seen a lot more mono white decks than any of the other ones. I think Catgator is just a fine card to play if you're playing just like a deck that has like 9 swamps in it, because by the time you get to 7 mana, you're dealing like 3 or 4 damage a lot of the time, and sometimes even more, depending on your deck and what scenario you are in. Waterbending Scroll I've seen do some work. I've played this one a decent amount. For more so late game control decks that need some inevitability, and they don't have like a mythic rare to give them the inevitability. And then Revelations I haven't really seen much. Rock-a-Lanch is okay. But Marshall's saying that he likes the green and white ones, especially for those monocolor decks. I just have not seen mono green a single time when I've been playing, and I've seen mono like heavy white decks a lot more frequently. So just take his experience where he likes those decks, and then I'm just supplementing it with my own. And he does say monocolor decks can get away with 16 lands. That's something that's like an advanced draft thought that I just can clarify as well, where if you're playing, you often play 17 lands, 9 of one color source, 8 of another. And part of that is because you want to have at least 8 sources of each of your colors, so you don't get color screwed, which is when you don't have both of your colors in your opening hand. Once you're playing a monocolor deck and you only need to have like the right number of lands, you don't need to care about having the right colors because you only have one color, you usually go down to 16 lands, because that's like a more optimal for like avoiding flooding out, which is like not like drawing enough of each color, but like not drawing, flooding out is drawing too many lands. But oftentimes when you don't need to care about having like enough sources of a color to cast your spells, you can go down to 16 lands. And an 8/8 mana base is a little bit less consistent because usually you'll be biased a little bit towards one color or another, and so you want to be able to cast those spells more reliably as well. So usually 17 lands, but if you're playing monocolored, oftentimes you can play 16, though of course it depends on the deck specifically. These monocolored build-arounds could be an enticing thing to chase if they come around late enough. Ambitious deck builders can also go for a 2-card combo with energy bending in conjunction with any of these payoffs in a normal deck, though it does tack 2 mana onto the cost. But hey, we call them build-arounds for a reason, right? I haven't seen anyone pull off the energy bending combo really, but I do think it's a really sweet combo and definitely something you can do. I do think it's a little bit better if you have like firebenders in your deck, because they can kind of spot you the 2 mana for this during combat. You cast energy bending, second main phase, cast like a Gather the White Lotus or whatever you want to do. Ambitious deck, yeah, but okay. Prince, not Pauper. Hotel lobby draft icon Brian David Marshall. He's also a Pro Tour historian. He's done a lot of commentary. He's a great member of the Magic community. Came up with a great term to quickly describe when the rares and mythic rares had a bigger than normal impact on a format. He called that a Prince format. A Pauper format would be one primarily dictated by the commons and uncommons. For the most part, all sets are functionally Pauper, but some have rares that hit really hard, and Magic the Gathering Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of those sets. Just read some of the cards I've shown you here. He highlights 4, 5, 6, 7 really, really strong rares, and you can't help but be impressed. The crazy part is that this is really just the tip of the iceberg as the list just keeps going and going. So he highlights Legend of Yang Chen, which is a great Saga rare. United Front makes an army by 1 card. The Legend of Kuruk, which makes like huge card advantage, then flips into like a mega creature that just does great stuff and makes an army. Wan Chi Tong, which just beats me every time I see it come into play. It just like draws a bunch of cards, usually flashes in and eats something mid-combat. Fire Nation Drill comes in and kills something. The Rise of Sozin, which just wipes the board and then eventually gives you a giant creature. Aang, Swift Savior, which is like a 3-mana 2/3 flyer, airbends, and then eventually transforms into a giant unbeatable card. Just fantastic rares across the board here. And these are, as you said, the tip of the iceberg, because as you can tell, a lot of these are like, I guess there's a decent mix of mythics and non-mythics here, but he's definitely highlighting more of the mythics, and there's some really fantastic rares as well. Like, of these 7 cards, like 5 of them are mythics, and he's only covered 2 of the rares, and there's some rares that are, it's only 7 cards, but he can't cover every single mythic rare that's really, really strong, but that's kind of the point. There's so many of them. What does this mean for our World Championship competitors? It means they really hope to open one of these great rares, of course, but it also means they have to be prepared with answers for opposing bombs. This is part of the reason why It'll Quench Ya, the 2-mana counterspell unless they pay 2, is performing so well, and why black removal like Deadly Precision and Sold Out are top of the heap black commons, so just 2 removal spells in black. You really want bombs of your own, but you also have to prevent your opponent from landing theirs. The games can be swingy in this format, so you'll have to tune in and not look away come Friday morning. So you'll want to tune in and not look away come Friday morning. I'll be there in the booth with Paul Cheon covering the drafts, and I hope you'll join us. So that's Marshall signing off. But just to cover the general points that he covered in this article, he thinks blue is the best color. He really likes it. He likes blue-white a lot. He thinks that the build-arounds are worth going for in many cases, and monocolor decks as well, and then also that this is a format where you really do have to prepare for bombs. If you made it to the end of this video, in the comments section down below, leave hashtag Marshall Overview to let me know you made it to the end. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.